You may think that I'm bothered by what I'm about to tell you, but I'm not, because I'm prepared. Which is not to say that I look forward to it, because it's going to be hell. We are closer to nuclear war than we've ever been in the nuclear age. That's an objective reality. There were periods throughout the Cold War where we were intermittently at a higher state of risk. Maybe there was some accidents that forced the presidents to call each other on the red line in the middle of the night, but by and large, there wasn't a high-intensity conflict raging between the Soviet Union and NATO at the time, which was much smaller at that time. Nowadays, we have a nuclear superpower with its back up against the wall, who views this current crisis as being an existential threat to its sovereignty, who is running out of options every single day, and they have just now ratified a revised version of their nuclear doctrine, which will permit them to utilize non-conventional weaponry under the right circumstances. Circumstances, I should add, that already exist. The conditions to precipitate a nuclear event have never been so numerous. And when you read this revised Russian nuclear doctrine, it is incredibly detailed. And I'm going to read you some of it today, and we can try to do a little bit of brainstorming in terms of understanding what NATO is going to do with this information. What I fear most is radio silence. We've been privileged up until this point, and this occurred to me today. It's very seldom that I have a revelation anymore. The further you get into the weeds with this stuff, the more seldom and more rare those aha moments are. But I had one today. And it's that we've become so accustomed to NATO and Russia telegraphing their next move, because this is a form of negotiation. We've just taken for granted the idea that NATO is broadcasting every single play it is going to make in Ukraine. And we've just presumed that this is so Russia doesn't, find out on their own and risk escalation in that way. Maybe it's because countries have to maintain their financial books, or maybe it's to be in line with certain international laws. But there is no law, as far as I know, that suggests that the United States has to tell the world a damn thing about what they provide Ukraine. We just presume when they say, hey, we're going to send some tanks, some F-16s, some Patriots, some ATACMS, HIMARS, we just presume that that's how it's supposed to be played. But how war is really played is when you don't hear anything. And need I remind people that at the time of signing this nuclear doctrine and putting it into law, there is no Russian ambassador in the United States. And we are in a situation for the next 2 months, to be exact, right on the nose, 60 days, we have a lame duck president and an apparent conflict of interest between this president and the next president that might create some incentive to create chaos before January 20th comes. We don't really truly appreciate how spoiled we've been with all this information about escalation. This nuclear red line today and some statements made by the NATO chief and other officials within NATO suggest that they are ready to cross Russia's red line. Now, we're going to read the nuclear doctrine, and we're going to see what exactly is that going to mean. Does that mean that it's going to escalate to the use of tactical nuclear weapons immediately? Or are we just talking about an Article 5 situation? Article 5, as some strategists have stated, would almost immediately lead to the potential for a nuclear strike. Like that would be immediate Defcon 2, because Article 5 presumes that NATO is about to fight Russia. Ergo, Russia would want to act first to preempt NATO's actions and do a first strike. So this is why Article 4 or 5 would likely happen covertly. And I think we're entering a period of time where they may no longer broadcast exactly what they're about to do, because that negotiating tactic no longer works. Now, I will say something before we get into this, because there's a lot of continuity of government going on here. Whether people want to admit it or not, one thing is true. Both Trump and Biden are both Americans. And at the end of the day, the enmity that exists between the Republicans and the Democrats is not greater than the one that exists between American leadership and Russian and Chinese and Iranian leadership and North Korean leadership. That is, those relationships are stronger than Trump and Vladimir Putin. And anyone who tries to suggest otherwise, you have no idea what you're talking about. And why I say this is because you'll notice that in the last 48 hours, since that unofficial announcement was made that the United States is going to be removing restrictions on strikes deep inside Russia so that Ukraine can maintain its foothold inside Russian territory, since that announcement was made, we have not heard one specific condemnation of this policy change by Trump or by Trump's national security advisor. People are going to falsely cite statements made by Mike Waltz recently, where he rather ambiguously, in a very roundabout way, kind of sort of didn't really criticize the move. He just said that things are getting out of control, more or less, and we need to have a plan to deal with this. We need peace. Trump, on the following day, came out with a very generic sort of statement about the Ukraine conflict that we've heard before. This is going to lead to World War III. But there was no specific condemnation of this particular move. This was, and whether people want to admit it or not, there's high-level collusion going on. Continuity of government trumps everything. No pun intended. I believe that the Biden administration is setting Trump up maybe to sabotage him, maybe to crash the whole thing before January 20th. But if not, the goal is likely to give Trump a bit of leverage, because this could have a negative reinforcement effect in that if Trump wants to go to the bargaining table with Vladimir Putin, this is but one more bargaining tool they have. We can remove this, reimpose these restrictions on Ukraine to stop doing these deep strikes into your territory. Should you agree to maybe, bring things back in the Donbass a little bit, maybe give up a little bit of Kherson. Now, Russia's never going to agree to this, okay? And so right now, I think a lot of people are being duped by this good cop, bad cop appearance, but American continuity of government trumps all. And whether you want to believe this or not, Biden and Trump are better buddies than Trump and Putin, okay? Now, we're going to, and I know that's going to piss a lot of people off, but that's just the facts. At the end of the day, America first is America first. So, like it or not, that is the case. And if you don't think that these deep state entanglements are not going to extend beyond party lines, we're talking about the Republicans. Maybe if Trump was an independent, then we'd be talking about something different. But these things transcend partisan politics. Now, we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Specifically, I want to bring to your attention Article 15 of this revised nuclear doctrine. We're not going to do the whole thing because it's going to take too long. But you really have to read this document to understand what it means. And can we please just, before I start this, have a moment of appreciation to realize where we're at. Every so often, I like to think back. If somebody were to tell me where we would be today 3 years ago, would I believe them? Would I believe it was possible? If somebody were to tell me 3 years ago that Iran just admitted, the right-hand man to the Ayatollah, that we can have a nuclear weapon in 24 hours, and they just finished doing the biggest ballistic bombardment of Israel in human history, and the North Koreans were fighting alongside the Russians inside Kursk, where the Ukrainians, backed by NATO, were invading. I mean, just think about all this, right? Somebody's telling you that your jaw's hitting the floor. And of course, it's during the pandemic, so you're like, what the fuck? You know, how is that even possible? But here we are. You still got normalcy bias abound. And every time when we have this oscillation between things ratchet up and then they die down a bit, and then everybody kind of adapts to that new level of escalation. And then they say, oh, nothing bad's ever going to happen. And then things ratchet up again and we get even closer. And here we are. We're like touching the void right now with this. Literally touching the void. Literally the ball is in the court of NATO at this point in time, possibly even in the Russian, depending on how this plays out. But here we are, and watch. Here we are in the next few days. It's going to die down, and everybody's going to think, oh, see, we told you nothing was going to happen. But we get closer and closer, and then BAM! That's it. Lights out. Then there's no more time to prep. If there's a guy walking down the street towards you with a gun in his hand, do you take action when you see the gun? Or do you wait until he pulls that gun out, he cocks it, and the bullet's coming out and fire? Is that when you take action? Of course not. All the signs are there. Every single sign. The militarization, the mass militarization in Europe, they're telling their citizens to prepare. And people are just oblivious NPCs waiting for it to be spelled out in plain English, which of course they can't. Because if they were to tell you the true nature of the threat, not only would you panic and you'd flip society upside down, but then that would likely accelerate and act as a catalyst for Russia to want to attack us faster. So we're in a certain predicament where if NATO was today to say, okay, everybody needs to start stockpiling 30, 60 days worth of food, they need to do it immediately, Russia's going to be like, holy shit, they're getting ready to attack. And that's going to ratchet things up. So they have to do it in such a way where it's kind of candy-coated and this Mickey Mouse 72-hour prepping bullshit. There are some countries who are getting real. Usually those are like the Baltic states. But above and beyond that, it's Mickey Mouse preparedness, right? So they can't do anything that's going to emphatically disrupt the markets and possibly trigger the war to come faster. So they have to surreptitiously just slowly massage it in to the psyche of people. And I'm a person who, I'm imperturbed by any of all this stuff that's going on right now. I don't even care because I'm as prepared as I'm going to be. I've seen this coming from a mile away. I'm a long-term investor in the sense with respect to preparedness. People are day-to-day oscillating day traders when it comes to preparedness. One day you're up and you're going crazy and you're freaking out, and the next day you're like, nothing bad is ever going to happen. And then, sure enough, we reach a new rung on the escalation ladder. Those people are freaking out, losing their minds again. Don't be that person. Understand the fundamentals dictate somebody has to win the war. Throughout all of human history, there has to be a winner. There can be an armistice, but that just means that whatever war is coming is going to be much, much worse. Fortunately, the Soviet Union dissipated, and that was that. And it was decided without firing a shot, more or less. I don't think we were never in a period like this where there was already a high-intensity conflict, and there were so many insulating factors at that time that actually made it less likely that we were going to go to nuclear war. I mean, we had so many nuclear weapons, and a lot of them, we had lots of tactical nuclear weapons, but there were so many nuclear weapons that mutually assured destruction was just like a foregone conclusion. Nowadays, in the non-nuclear proliferation age, we've actually increased the likelihood of nuclear events because, yeah, there's still enough nukes to destroy the planet, more or less, but not nearly as much as there once was. So anyways, I'm getting away from the point, but I really just hope people appreciate, I know you guys do, appreciate the gravity of the situation that we're currently facing. It is immense. It is growing by the day. Article 15 of the revised nuclear doctrine. The key military dangers which may escalate into threats to the Russian Federation and require neutralization through nuclear deterrence include, and I'll paraphrase, they're basically saying these are the situations where we may have to use nuclear weapons. Pretty much everything I'm about to tell you is already a condition, a criteria that's been met. The potential adversary's possession, number one, of nuclear and or other types of weapons of mass destruction that may be used against the Russian Federation and or its allies, as well as the means of delivery of these types of weapons. So, if you have an F-35, guess what? If you're party to the conflict, it's a green light, essentially. If you have a launching platform that can deliver nuclear weapons, you are potentially, this is grounds for using nuclear weapons. So it extends beyond, and this is why, anybody that the U.S. gives F-35s to is also a country that when the time comes, they're going to mount nuclear weapons on said F-35s, fly them into Russia, and this is actually part of their plan. I actually have their plan right here. Masters of the Air, Strategic Stability and Conventional Strikes, where they detail in depth exactly how they plan to fight a war, a nuclear war with Russia, without it even going nuclear. I'll break that down in the future. But this is a part of NATO's plan. Now, let's carry on here. The presence, B, and deployment of potential adversaries of missile defense systems. Just missile defense systems, medium and short-range cruise and ballistic missiles, high-precision, non-nuclear or hypersonic weapons, unmanned strike platforms, and directed energy weapons. Pretty much everything under the sun, everything that Poland is surely in possession of, and of course, Ukraine is in possession of a lot of these items as well. So already, the justification, if you're in a state of war with a nation and they possess these capabilities, this is potentially grounds for using nuclear weapons. C, the buildup of enemy conventional forces near the Russian Federation's borders or in adjacent maritime areas. We've seen this from Finland all the way down, especially in Poland, but all the way down into the Black Sea. Fortunately, because of the strategic ambiguity of the Turks, the Bosphorus Strait has not been fully exploited by NATO for this capacity just yet. D, the creation and deployment of space-based missile defense systems and anti-satellite weapons and strike systems by adversaries. If you think SpaceX is just so Tony Stark can launch Teslas into outer space and put fart buttons on them and meme about it with Donald Trump, you're sadly mistaken. I know a lot of people don't like Neil deGrasse Tyson, but you need to go and watch his breakdown of why SpaceX is not economically viable. Sure, they got Starlink, they're a delivery platform, but a delivery platform for who? They're contracted by the US government to militarize space. This fantasy land about any investment firms getting behind Elon Musk going to Mars for what? What's the return on that investment? Sure, there could be potential, there could be gold on Mars for all we know. But they don't know that, and you're not going to invest in something unless you absolutely know. So it's all cover for the militarization of space. Vladimir Putin knows it. They like to be diplomatic with Elon because they see it as a potential de-escalatory inroad into negotiations. But at the end of the day, they realize that this militarization of space is happening, and it's happening under the guise of Tony Stark's SpaceX. So make no mistake about it. There's a reason why Elon is so close to the problem. The deployment of nuclear weapons and their delivery means in non-nuclear states. Of course, if there was word that NATO was about to arm Ukraine with nuclear weapons, I don't think that that would ever be able to materialize without us seeing a mushroom cloud. Now, Ukraine already has the capability, it claims, to build, well, not it unofficially claims, some non-NGO think tank claims that Ukraine can make a nuclear weapon using its spent uranium within a matter of a few months. And of course, they do have the deployment systems, they can make dirty bombs, but we're talking about the empowerment of these states with nuclear weapons by NATO countries. There's a very high likelihood that we could see Poland having nuclear weapons soon. because Finland and a lot of these Baltic states are in possession of these advanced stealth fighter craft that can carry nuclear weapons, they would fall up under this as well. Actions isolating parts of the Russian Federation's territory, such as blocking critical transport links. We might consider the Crimean Bridge, who everybody seemed to have forgotten about. Now that they have the green light to utilize ATACMS, although I think they've already tried to attack the Crimean Bridge. It's heavily defended with electronic warfare capabilities, S-300, S-400, all of Russia's most advanced air defense equipment, but something like that would be another red line. Remember, none of this was codified, none of this was ratified into law. The Russians are incredibly jurisprudent. So now they've basically given themselves, with everything I'm telling you here, this is essentially what's been the case for since the war began, right? So now they're just saying, well, if we want, we can use nukes whenever we decide. And it's in line with our own doctrine, right? Because they're, say what you will about the Russians, but they are judicious. They like to cross their T's and dot their I's. And I think this was Putin's last opportunity to the West to say, hey, we've made this nuclear doctrine. We warned you. You kind of backed off a little bit. And then now we didn't sign it at that time because we wanted to save that one final step in the hopes that we wouldn't have to do this. But you left us no choice. Actions by the potential adversary aimed at striking, destroying, terminating environmentally hazardous facilities in the Russian Federation. Of course, they're referring to specifically the Kursk nuclear power plant here, which could lead to technological, ecological, or social disasters. So with those ATACMS, which I should add have been heavily active over the last 48 hours, we showed you some footage last night, contrary to what is being circulated on the internet. No, that is not old footage. It is, however, a place that was targeted in the past. That very ammunition depot was already targeted successfully, and it was targeted again, and the footage I showed you yesterday is 100% new. Anyways, today it's happened again. There was another salvo of drones and ATACMS missiles that were fired into Russian territory. I have video to show you guys if we ever get through this. Actions by the potential adversary aimed at striking, destroying environmental hazard. Okay, we already talked about that one. Large-scale military exercises by adversaries near the Russian Federation's borders. Again, steadfast defender and aspects thereof have been ongoing basically for the last year and a half, okay? So, this is all up Russia's border from the Arctic all the way down to the Black Sea. Uncontrolled proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, their means of delivery, technologies, and the equipment for their production. That is just a handful of the items that are listed as conditions that would meet the criteria to justify using nuclear weapons for Russia from this point forward. This was not the case before Vladimir Putin signed this today. So understand where we are. We're in a much different place than we once were. The amount of detail in this document surprised a lot of people, okay? Now today, and this goes back to signaling, today this could just be normal stuff. This could just be everyday military activity, but it caught the attention of some of the OSINT crowd. And it was that I think a total of 8 Russian Ministry of Defense planes were heading east. I'm not sure where they were heading east. In the east is where, of course, Russia has a lot of its deep underground military bunkers. And it's signaling like this, that we're entering an age of signals. Because, again, we are, I think, past the point where we're going to continue to be telegraphing what we're going to do next. I think we're in a new stage of escalation now where we're not going to be announcing what we're doing officially. And this is very evident with the Biden administration. Now, with the exception of, let me see if I have the actual story here. There was one official source, a guy who worked with the U.S. State Department, who did in fact confirm that the U.S. did in fact remove restrictions on Ukraine. I got so many darn windows open here. It's probably going to be the last one I pick. No, I can't seem to find it. Anyways, a member of the State Department did confirm that this was in fact the case. Oh, here he is, right at the end. This guy here, Assistant Secretary of State Brian Nichols, who confirmed the reports, told Brazilian news outlet O Globo that the decision aimed at pressuring Moscow into peace talks was to confirm authorization for Ukraine to use long-range missiles against Russia. Now, I don't think we're going to ever get official confirmation anymore, because from here on in, as we're on the precipice of a nuclear exchange, it makes no sense for NATO to utilize that bargaining tactic, that telegraphing bargaining tactic. And it makes no sense for Russia to do it anymore either, where they're signaling. But they are going to do this subterfuge, this type of signaling to the United States. And if you don't know what I mean by this, there's a video I released probably about a year ago where I talked about Project Ryan. It was a project by the Russians in the 80s where they were trying to assess what were some of the telltale signs that the United States was getting ready to do a nuclear strike. And there were, 100 or so of these signs that they identified, even more than that, I think. I talked about the 50 main ones in that video. You should go watch it. It's very good. It's basically what would happen before a nuclear war. What are some of the signs you would see? Would you see the White House full of cars, or would the parking lot be empty? That sort of thing. Because they had to look for these sorts of things because they knew it would not be broadcast. Okay, so now we're entering a phase where these signals are going to be sent, where if you're not paying attention to it, unless you're in the OSINT realm, you're not paying attention to these things, right? So the average person, it's not going to incite panic, but it's going to be a way for both sides to talk to each other, because they're no longer going to be talking through the mouthpieces of mainstream media. There is no reason why we had to broadcast any of the military equipment that we sent into Ukraine. Sure, the Russians might find out one day that a ATACMS or a JASMS missile fell on them, so what? Is it better to beg for forgiveness? You can make that argument. Now I think we're going to enter a period of radio silence, because now everything that we do officially is going to, we need that ambiguity now. Okay, we need plausible deniability at this point in time, because Russia's new nuclear doctrine is so specific. So when you have all of these Ministry of Defense planes in Russia flying to the east, who knows where, maybe this was just an exercise, very well could be. These are going to now be how Russia and NATO communicate, even post-Trump. Because again, Trump, Biden, continuity of government trumps everything. Okay? All right, so getting into the nitty-gritty, Russian media, of course, is reiterating. I'm not sure if this is new, but basically, this is Wednesday night in Russia, talking about how they're going to nuke all the countries in Europe. But now, of course, it hits different with this new revelation of the revised nuclear doctrine. And at any point, they could make the determination that now's the time. So, of course, the Russians are prepared for it. Of course, I showed you, I think was it about a month and a half ago, where I shared a utility bill that a person from Russia sent me, and on the back of it were nuclear instructions on how to survive like a nuclear event. And this is something they hadn't seen anymore. Never mind the countless amounts of unprecedented exercises, nuclear exercises, literal Mad Max nuclear war exercises that have been happening in Russia. And I'm not talking about the annual ones. I'm talking about the ones that were relatively new. This is an attack that happened today inside inside Russia, near the borders. I'm not sure if it was, Bryansk, but another deep strike. Utilizing presumably a drone, but it could have been basically a part of a larger volley of ATACMS and drones. Ukraine is saying that they're going to be able to produce 3,000 of their own homegrown Neptune missiles that I believe they were originally an anti-ship missile, and then they started repurposing them for, land-to-land, like a land-based missile for any other target, maybe even surface-to-air. But so now they're going to be using that in conjunction with the 50,000 unmanned aerial vehicles that they're going to be producing that, of course, have this effect. And the Germans are also sending 4,000 UAVs as well. So the drone war is going to continue. Ukraine, however, is getting hit as well. This is what Russia did in the Sumy region today. They put several bombers up in the air, and they did a massive strike once again on the numerous places throughout Ukraine that are now, much of it is in the dark intermittently. There's rolling blackouts in numerous places. EU must prepare for sending troops to Ukraine. All 12 troops from Estonia are about to be sent to Ukraine. The dogs that bark loudest, that whole thing, right? Bloc members should be ready if any Moscow-Kiev peace deal is brokered by the US. So peace means war, I guess, because if you're going to put NATO troops inside Ukraine, I think that's a non-starter, unless you put them to the left of the Dnieper River, not the geographical left, but to the actual literal western left of the Dnieper River. Maybe that's how this thing's going to be resolved, along the river. I mean, in a sensible world, that really would be the best solution to prevent nuclear Armageddon. Have a temporary armistice in the very least so we can rearm and do this all in 10 years, but at least it's 10 years down the road. I don't think this is going to be successful because now you have the conflict in Ukraine, intrinsically, it's the word I'm looking for, inextricably linked to what's going on in Iran and North Korea. They're all inextricably linked together. So if the war in Iran ratchets up, even if there is an armistice in Ukraine and Russia, Russia's going to get involved, and that's going to cause the Ukraine war to flare up once again. So everything's connected. The Russians are currently building these mobile bunkers. These are mobile nuclear-proof bunkers. I don't know if they got lead surrounding them, because you do need 3 feet of earth, or I believe it's a couple feet of concrete. You can see here, they look like shipping containers that are outfitted with thicker walls. I don't think this is going to be enough wall to protect you from gamma radiation unless there's some lead in there or something. They're certainly built to be obviously bomb-proof to a certain degree and maybe blast resistant. The fact that Russia is creating things like this, should be a concern to people here in the West. But hey, Bitcoin's at all-time highs and MicroStrategies, not a bubble at all. Interesting how they have these support trusses on the sides. You would think that would be, I guess it makes sense. I guess it might make sense. I'd have to look more into the architecture of this, but I'm going to have to send this to the container guy, Channing, over there and see exactly what he has to say about this. It looks actually, now that I'm looking at, those look like concrete blocks that are added to the outside. Huh, interesting. So you can see these massive concrete blocks outside the shipping. So all it is, this one anyways, is a reinforced shipping container with concrete on the outside. Huh, an above ground nuclear bunker. Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, well, Mark Root. And this confirms my hypothesis of that they're about to go radio silent, okay? Mark Root, the new NATO chief, not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, but he basically said today in this message that they are now, they see no reason, I'll just skip to the part here, I'm not going into whether individual allies should yes or no, or what they are doing, obviously in reference to allowing Ukraine to do deep strikes in Russian territory. If they want to do so, I would generally say let's not communicate too much and not make our adversaries more wise than is necessary. So he's saying it right there. This is the NATO chief saying we should not tell Russia anymore what we're going to do. And, you know, duh, you would think that would be the case since the beginning, but they were using it as a negotiating tactic, and that is the epiphany that I had today, is that, you know, it makes perfect sense, you know, but nobody really seen it, or at least maybe they did, wasn't common knowledge anyways. Lavrov has now, once again, and look, you might not like the Russians, you should never not like a nation of people, but you may not like the Russian leadership. I will say that Lavrov seems to be a straight shooter. Everything he says happens. And here's what Lavrov has to say. The West wants escalation of the conflict. Kiev couldn't have struck Russia with ATACMS missiles without Washington's participation. So it's U.S. troops who are helping with the targeting, or NATO troops who are helping with the targeting of and using the ATACMS to do these deep strikes inside Russia. The West appears to be working towards, and notice how he carefully words things, never says anything definitively. The West appears to be working, because he's a diplomat, right? Appears to be working towards escalating the Ukraine conflict. Lavrov has said, following reports that the ATACMS missile was used, blah, blah, blah. Lavrov admitted that he had no way to confirm whether the media reports regarding Biden's permission granted to Kiev were true. Again, trying to maintain the niceties of diplomacy. However, he suggested that ATACMS strikes on Bryansk were a clear sign that they want escalation. I've thought that for the longest time, Lavrov has simply given up, and he's been kind of fatalistic about this, but he still shows up and tries to put his best diplomatic foot forward. Nonetheless, it appears as though he's a bit more jaded nowadays. The minister noted that it is impossible to use technologically complex ATACMS launchers without the help of the U.S. and recalled Russian President Vladimir Putin's warning that Moscow would be forced to change its position if Ukraine received permission to use Western long-range weapons inside Russian territory. Lavrov stressed that Moscow perceives the launch of long-range missiles controlled by the U.S. as a qualitatively new phase of the war with the part of the rest. I forgot, Mark Root said one of the justifications for allowing long-range was the North Korean presence, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. The only way that makes sense is if the North Koreans are, in fact, propping up the Russians to a degree that is significant enough to postpone the attritional collapse of the Russian economy and the Russian military. Because so long as Putin can exploit Korean manpower, he doesn't have to call another military draft. He maintains a relatively high popularity amongst his people, although his back is up against the corner. So they're perhaps saying that now they have to ratchet things up because this North Korea thing wasn't something maybe they factored into the equation. I don't see how, but again, these are Western leaders, so they've had it too nice for too long, and so they forgot how to think long term. They don't know how to play chess anymore. I hope that they in the West will read this doctrine, and not the way they read the UN Charter, okay? Seeing only what they need, obviously in reference to the Gaza Strip, but the doctrine in its entirety and its interconnectedness, basically signaling that the conditions for Russia to utilize these nukes is already there if they so choose to use it. Zelensky has, of course, welcomed this idea of using weapons inside Russia and has encouraged other NATO countries to join in on the fun. Vladimir Putin confirming these are allegedly a video of the first ever ATACMS launching into Russia today. That cannot be 100% confirmed. Here we have Keir Starmer. This one is kind of scary, I gotta admit. Again, I'm pretty stoic when it comes to this stuff because I'm as prepared as I'm gonna be. I mean, I could always be more prepared. I could always have more skills. I could have a bigger network, but I mean, people are like, oh, you're freaking out every day. I'm not freaking out. You're freaking out. Why the hell do I have to freak out, man? I got 10 years worth of food and enough ammunition. I got more ammunition than frickin' Estonia, okay? Maybe even more guns. All right, let's hear what Keir Starmer has to say.
Russia is the aggressor,
Even
and
if
Russia
it unleashes nuclear...
to comment on operational
In
details.
principle, are the missiles a game changer? In principle.
The reason that I'm not going to comment is, I think, well understood, which is Putin is the winner if we do so, and it will undermine Ukraine, and I'm not prepared.
So now they're no longer talking about it, again confirming my hypothesis that there now is going to be radio silence about the weapons sent, and that is very dangerous.
Just quickly, Russia's also threatened nuclear escalation. Are you comfortable with that when people at home are watching this, worrying that you could put us at risk?
Well, it's very important. It's very important that we're steadfast in our support for...
I'm actually quite impressed that the media, Sky News, which is kind of like fringe UK media, they're kind of more of a right-leaning media, I suppose. I'm surprised, though, that they're challenging him on this, because this is not typical for UK media.
Ukraine. Russia is the aggressor.
Even if it unleashes nuclear war?
Even if it unleashes nuclear war, and notice how he continuously deflects.
Has to be the one that makes the move to stop this war. It's within their gift, but we must support Ukraine. It's impacting not just Ukraine, it's impacting the rest of the world, including the UK.
Is your message to viewers back home that there will not be a nuclear war? Because that is what Russia is threatening.
So she's trying to say, like, hey, Russia just signed a new nuclear doctrine. It is there for everyone to see. They've been doing tactical nuclear drills on the border. Their missiles are on rolling combat duty. They're currently on a highest state of nuclear readiness. There's no ambassador inside the United States. Are you sure that you're sure? He just says, all right, we'll take his word for it this time again. Oh, what's going on here? This is Radoslaw Sikorski. I'm not sure if I pronounce his name, but he's cheerleading this on too, because of course, Poland wants to be the biggest, baddest military in the EU. I hope they realize that the United States isn't giving them all those weapons for nothing. Eventually, they're going to be asked to do something with those weapons. Yeah, that's what's going down. Operation Deutschland. Germany is preparing up plans for World War III. Deutschland. I got to work on my German accent. That's going to be my next character, is a German character. Okay, so Germany has a plan to mobilize for war. I really think what this is, I mean, these numbers are paltry. Even if you look at World War II, Germany had 7 million troops, I think, at peak. They're talking about 800,000 troops, 200,000 NATO vehicles, enlisting truck drivers from the east, preparing stockpiles for shortages, so strategic reserves, military protection for key buildings, building out their civil defense infrastructure. This is really for the purpose of how to manage the population post-SHTF after the radioactive dust clouds settle. Understand that NATO thinks they can win a nuclear war. And every ATACMS missile that flies inside Russia is a probing operation. It's creating a virtual map of Russian air defense that could potentially someday be used for that strike, that first strike. And who knows what, I don't know why SpaceX comes to mind for some reason, but I have a feeling that that is going to be integral to the plan, okay? Germany's World War III preparations, we've talked about this months ago, but it's broached the mainstream once again. A 1,000-page secret document, Operation Deutschland, outlines Germany's plans for national defense in the event of a large-scale war. I talked to you yesterday about the candy-coated Mickey Mouse preparedness that other countries are currently getting their populations primed for. Went in depth about that yesterday. I was going to talk about this yesterday, but I just went off on 50,000 different word salad tangents, as I typically do. Guilty as charged, don't give a fuck at this point. Increased tensions, growing concerns over Russia's war in Ukraine and the involvement of countries like North Korea have heightened fears of global conflict. We're just figuring this out now. These are things you do before you blow up the pipeline. First, you mobilize for war, then you blow up the pipeline. You don't do it when the price of gas is through the roof, Germany. Come on. Emergency plans are focused on protecting key infrastructure and preparing for potential military threats. Civil defense measures, German companies, including those in the Hamburg Chamber of Commerce, are advised to prepare for self-sufficiency, such as installing diesel generators and wind turbines. And of course, everybody should expect to have their shit expropriated by the government when the time comes. If you haven't seen my videos about martial law and World War III, they're going to come for everybody's shit. So just, make sure you have a little boating accident or two beforehand and have a few caches kicking around, okay? Transportation concerns. Officials raise concerns about the dependence on Eastern European drivers and how war could disrupt logistics. Those Tesla semis could not come fast enough. They need to build these Schengen corridors, which are specifically designed to move large amounts of military equipment across mainland Europe when the shit hits the fan. But again, all of this presumes that it's going to be a conventional war. I don't see in what reality they're going to keep this at the conventional level. Russia doesn't have the manpower to fight a conventional war. Apparently, with 800,000 troops, neither does Germany. That probably is a sizable enough force to police whatever remains of the mutated population that didn't catch a million-degree suntan after the shit hits the fan. NATO readiness. Plans include moving NATO troops and hundreds of thousands of vehicles across Germany if a conflict escalates. Again, Nordic countries, all countries, are getting flashlights on batteries, and they are prepared, man. They are prepared. Trump confirms plan to use military for deportations. This is going to be entangled with the foreign policy stuff. Yeah, you're going to see some domestic terrorism in the dragnet of gang members and MS-13, 19, whatever the hell it is. You're going to see a lot of Chinese nationals get caught up in that because, of course, remember all of those Chinese folk coming across the border. I'm sure there's going to be some sort of modern day McCarthyist witch hunt for, Russian colluders and Iranians. And, there's going to be a lot of people that get swept up in this, and it's going to get ugly. And it's going to probably result in some type of martial law. Some type of martial law that could very well cause a great domestic disturbance that could potentially put the United States at a disadvantage, but could be the very thing that is required to turn the United States into remilitarize the United States. Why did the movie The Running Man just come to mind? I just feel that that's where we're heading, The Running Man. I feel that that's where, somewhere in between, The Running Man, Children of Men, that's going to be 2025. Go watch the movie Children of Men. That's what you're going to see in 2025. And it's going to lead to total chaos. And I assume that our adversaries are going to attempt to exploit the discontent that arises when you have military guys in fatigues. I don't know if they're going to put them in fatigues or not, scooping people off the street. Whether or not they're illegal criminals or not, it's going to create all kinds of problems. But what they're going to do is they're going to say, these Iranians or someone else is going to, they're going to try to tie this to the wars that are currently going on somehow. Just watch. Okay, we already talked about those. Oh, Jim Cameron, save the day. Jimmy, he says nuclear war is coming. I think obviously he's in on the running joke that he's always wrong. And I actually don't know if this is, somebody probably just made this up. This is probably the result of the internet. Anytime Jim Cramer tweets about something the next day, it plummets, right? So the hope is that if he's saying that nuclear war is coming, maybe it's not going to happen. Maybe this is the one time he's going to be right, unfortunately. Like I said, Ukraine, this is just a statement by Zelensky that they're going to be building 30,000 long-range kamikaze UAVs and 3,000 cruise missiles, Neptune cruise missiles. Wall Street, shake it off, pump the markets one more time. Maybe this means the Fed will print more money. World War III couldn't come sooner, so we can get back to QE. Polymarket, up 4% today. Will a nuclear weapon detonate in 2024? A 16% chance, up 4% in a day. That's crazy. That is crazy. That means people are actually betting real money. There's a 16% chance. That's a, can you imagine taking a plane ride and there's a 16% chance it crashes? This is a commenter, a subscriber to the channel. And I'm not throwing shade on this individual. Don't get mad or trash talk this person in the comments. I just wanted to use this as an example, okay? Because I should have probably blacked out the name. But, I mean, it's a public forum, so, if you use it, then be prepared to lose it. They say, oh no, we're all going to die. Nobody has all this stuff, in reference to me talking about preps. Nobody needs all of this. Yeah, you're just going to go out and survive in the wilderness and you're going to, flint knap and make arrows out of rocks and do all that shit. Nope, you're going to die. My parents and my grandparents and great-grandparents survived countless wars, including World War I, World War II, and civil wars, without any of this. So great-grandparents, I presume this person is definitely Gen X and beyond, must be, if they're talking about civil wars, maybe even more than that. Maybe couldn't be the silent generation, or are they still around? Anyways, baby boomers, obviously. And I just basically tell them, look, you ain't your grandparents, so you better get to work. And your grandparents probably were preppers. They just didn't call it prepping at the time. They probably had pantries and jars full of stuff, and they knew how to hunt. They knew how to grow their own food. They probably had a horse that, ran on grass, and they could do all these things. You are not your grandparents. You won't rise to the occasion. You're going to go out and you're going to die, which is why you need to prepare, okay? Or don't. John Thune reiterated unrelenting support for Israel. So, yep, they're going to go to war with Israel. There's no doubt about that. In fact, Iran today threatened that if it may consider a nuclear response if the International Atomic Energy Agency issues a statement against it. By that, they don't mean they're going to immediately nuke anybody. They just mean that they're going to maybe start enriching more uranium openly. But nonetheless, they spilled the beans yesterday and they said, hey, we can have a nuke in 24 hours, which is essentially admitting that you already have nuclear weapons or all of the ingredients to build one, because there's no way you can do that in 24 hours if you don't already have all the components tried and tested. There was a Danish Navy ship that boarded a Chinese bulk carrier, and they consider them the main suspect in a cutting of a cable. Now, was this an accident? Probably. It usually is. They're dragging an anchor, and the anchor, rips across the cable, because there's so many of these undersea cables. I don't know what the rules and regulations are traversing the Baltic Sea. But Europe is really, really trying to drive China out. The display by Keir Starmer and Xi Jinping and Baerbock from Germany, and the lack of any deference towards the Chinese and their capabilities is just, it's really staggering how we are underestimating the Chinese. Could you imagine, just imagine the army that China is going to build in the next 10 years, quietly. All these numbers we're basing, they got 400 nukes. Yeah, maybe 10 years ago. Once these guys start mass producing anything, it's game over. Even if it is a copy of a copy of a copy. And even if, what is that Stalin quote? Quantity is quality of its own. I gotta go, guys. If you want to support the channel, man, CanadianPreparedness.com, or leave a trolling remark or a supportive remark. It all helps out. Thanks for watching. Take care.